Hi lovelies, and thank you for joining me today. Today I wanted to spend some time catching you up with some of the amazing experiences I've been having on my witchcraft and spiritual journey, which I think might be of interest to you. It's ideas around liminality and liminal spaces and how and why that might be important for us to consider as witches. Weaver's card. I work with one Weaver's card a month, full moon to full moon. It was the vessel card. Now in this story there is the story of the woman that walks up onto a rock face to stare out at the ocean, which is incredible because this is the ritual oracle card that I also pulled alongside this. Now the story in this is of a shapeshifter, so somebody that can transform state, and that's a key, I think, to one of the reasons why liminal space is so important to consider, because liminal space is a place of transformation. It's an in-between place where we go from somewhere to somewhere else. It is a transformative journey. So to get a shape-shifting card, it immediately put me in that mindset of thinking about the times in my life where I've had to shape-shift and go from one identity to another and walk into liminal space. I'm looking at this card in front of me, that place where you know you've got to change, or you know you're being pushed from somewhere you're comfortable and you don't yet know where the exit is. You can't see it yet, and it's really scary because you think you might be stuck forever, but you have to start moving. This liminal space looking out at the ocean is one I know very well. The story tells us of her looking out at the ocean and spotting a seagull flying. Now I depicted this in one of my sketchbooks, trying to grab onto the essence of the story of this card, because she sees the seagull flying and she knits her soul by shape-shifting into that of the seagull. You can see she's here up on the rocks and she sees the seagulls flying, and the seagulls for her teach her about freedom and being free, and that sense of freedom, which is what I went to this very liminal space for. I have done a video on my channel before about magic places where elements meet. The ocean and the beach is one very easy to spot place where different worlds and different elements meet, because you've got the land meeting the ocean, two very different worlds, plus the sky gets bigger over the ocean. There's that sense of freedom. So that initial part of this Weaver's story I really recognized, because when my life imploded and I was just absolutely plunged out of anything that ever once looked like my life, I felt like I was being buried alive by it all. I couldn't breathe, and I bought my caravan at the ocean, and it was the only place for years that I could breathe, and I was this woman on the rocks looking out at the seagulls, reteaching myself to breathe again. This space was the breathing space. The weight of their betrayal had crushed me, filled the grave with soil. This was a place the soil lifted, a bucket and spade drama of the cruelest kind. I sat with my dog and stared out at the ocean over years of disbelief. So many tears, my face awash, an ocean in itself. This place numbed me, my breath a rhythm to switch everything off as waves crashed back and forth. Here was nothingness to match my disassociated soul. I split and watched myself watching the waves crying, but at least here there was breath. This the start of the rebirthing, how to breathe again, the waves and liminal space numbing enough to risk trying. Then in the rest of the story she knits herself from seagull to Selkie. The Selkie myth is all about a woman betrayed and shedding skins, again shape-shifting, and then from the Selkie she becomes a woman that she can see on the beach on the stones, collecting stones, and we come full circle to a woman with the strength of stones who's learned about freedom. So this card immediately put me into an elemental liminal space that I already know really well. I also depicted it on another page here. I wrote the story of the card here, and I tried to use the colours of water meeting sand, fading into this woman, so she's merging with the lessons of that liminal space as she's transforming. This is this card's journey, but it's also my journey, and it made me realise just how important and life-giving liminal space has been to me in my own story as I've stepped into my own power. It is a place where you can access power. So shape-shifting and journeys into liminality, it was right there in my head. The journey of the shapeshifter is one of the liminal, from one state, one form, one world to another. There is an exciting power within the liminal, a sense of intentionally dropping what once was, without yet a firm understanding of what will be. It is an unmaking. It is a place where bird becomes Selkie, becomes woman with the strength of stones. It is without any doubt a place of transformation. It is physical, energetic, mental, magical. It is a place of letting go to begin again. It is a crossroads, a door, a portal, an in-between, a no man's land. A place to dream. It is an upside down. A place to put your fear into the river that runs both ways. A place of wisdom of ancestors and of whispers freely given. A place to take hold of your soul, to forge the path, claim a map. The story in this card also tells of how she knots her soul into these different stories that she's stepping into and shape-shifting, but she's in charge. It's not things that are being done to her, it's power that she's finding within liminality and the liminal space to choose what to knot back into her life. So this is actually a knot work spell. When I think of new things that I want to knot back into my present reality, I am knotting these red cords. So this is actually an active spell page in my in an Art Witch sketchbook. The power of the liminal space. And I also felt that in the week where I was up at the caravan again in the summer, by doing a very short barefoot grounding walk every morning. Every morning I woke up really stressed and full of anxiety, which I've been battling with of late, but just a short barefoot grounding walk on the grass completely transformed my state. The transformative power that wasn't coming from me, it was coming from the ground. And I again thought, this is where elements meet. It's where the ground and the soil beneath and the earth beneath my feet meet the air above, and I'm literally on that connecting point. That's why it's so powerful. I was accessing power that wasn't mine to transform my state again. And every morning I went in the space of 5 minutes to completely calm, ready to receive joy, ready to take challenges just one step at a time, anxiety free. And I thought, wow, that is liminal space, but going vertically. And I am literally standing with my feet on the portal between this vertical liminal space between air and between earth, and it was incredible. So that was it then. Those two realizations made me start thinking about liminal space. What on earth is it? So in one of my altered books, you can see this has truly grabbed me. I then started to work on a page where I could see liminal space. You can see earth meeting water there again, but I also glued on something that represented the woods to me as well, because I think entrances into woods and that idea of going through a wood, that mental wood of the only way through is out, with us as the character of Little Red Riding Hood almost, is also a very transformative idea if you're on a healing journey of what liminal space is. So here you've got the woods, you've got the ocean, you've got earth, you've also got the transformation journey represented by butterflies, knotting in joy, the sun, sunflowers. It's all there, and this window here is ready to take a little booklet that I've been working through, writing notes about liminal space. The camel's on the front because that made me laugh. It's an animal that carries water with it. It's got liminal space within it, so I thought a camel was a really good animal representation for liminal space too. So what have I been writing in here? First of all, let's think about what is liminal space. What can it be? So for anybody interested, I really wanted to share what I've started to write inside my book. So to be clear on what liminal space actually is, these are all my notes and research and aha moments. I've put, what is it? It is the in-between. I think that word, the in-between, really is a good way of describing what liminal space is. It's something in between, the space that lies between the known and the unknown, and I think that's why it can be so scary. It is a transformative and transitional space of heightened intensity. It is an unknown space. They're disconnected spaces away from your understanding of reality upon entering, although stay too long, and they can also become home. That was my biggest aha moment so far. Liminal spaces, they're waiting spaces between one point and another. It's a place where you don't belong to, or you shouldn't really belong to, but sometimes that's where you do feel the most at home. It's easier to understand what is liminal by what isn't liminal. Its opposite is a fixed, stable state with clear purpose. Liminal space is just on the verge of something else. So we've got that idea of like the coastline again. It can be forlorn, empty, outside of all routine and unsettling to many. It's a place that no longer serves a purpose, abandoned outside of civilization. It is the unfamiliar, devoid of activity. It's a linking space that feels unfamiliar. So lots of ideas there around what liminal spaces actually are. Now, the etymology of liminal comes from the Latin word limen, which means a threshold. Now, that's why my latest tarot deck purchase, which you see on the desk here, is this one, the Tarot of 78 Doors. If limen means threshold, then things like doorways or portals or windows or archways through, that's the entrance point into the liminal. And I think this is why I've always felt like a hedge witch. It's that boundary line between one world and another. You can see by this card on top that there are aspects of that idea of thresholds depicted here in the doorway. This is the point at which you step into the liminal, or fall off into the liminal, or descend into the liminal. So that's why I was really excited to start working with this deck. And I've put here, I found that these spaces can be physical, like the beach. They can be mental, they can be emotional, they can be elemental, they can be horizontal, they can be vertical, like the grounding walk on grass. They can be time-based. Some liminal space only feels liminal at certain times of the day or year. Others are liminal all the time. So time is a component often in this. And I think traveling in time is also a component of this, which is really useful, I think, for shadow work, like going back in time to meet previous selves, or ancestral work if you're a witch, like going back to meet ancestors. It's a stepping back. Liminal space comes into play in those aspects of witchcraft practice. If we are in that space longer than necessary to pass through, it may feel off or eerie. So that idea of being stuck forever, is there any exit? I think not being able to see an exit is what makes mazes scary, for example. So I just brainstormed as many ideas for liminal space as I could think of. So waiting rooms, airports, car parks, stairwells, elevators, empty art galleries, hotels and their hallways just in general, schools during breaks, non-functioning buildings, abandoned buildings, lighthouses, whether they're working or not, any space no longer able to perform its intended function, any transient space from one place to another, doorways, arches, the back rooms, look, and it goes on and on. Junctions, paths into woods, ladders, attics and cellars, tidal areas of beaches which are neither land nor sea. Sacred circles are also liminal spaces into magic realms. So there's so many. I could do videos on each of these. But then I also thought about emotional liminal spaces and states. So these aren't physical, but rather liminal mental spaces and states. Liminal periods are most often the result of transitional moments that give you the sense of a new identity or a role. So you can have psychological, metaphorical and emotional liminal states. So things like divorce or job loss or relocating house, breakups. Dieting is liminal because you're trying to become something else. Health changes, puberty, menopause, transitions between child, teenage, adult, grief. All of these, again, so many forms of emotional liminal space. And then liminal spaces with time as well, so times of the day when places are empty or unused. Sabbats as well in our witchcraft, often when magic is most able to be grabbed. That's the power of the liminal. It's the wheel turning as we shift from one state to another. The minute the liminal turns up, we're in transition and we are in the closest access to magic, I think. Like things like the solstices or sunset or sunrise or equinoxes. Really important mental liminal spaces, and also things to do with time. So I think a really useful thing for you to do would be to go through the timeline of your life and find the places where you found yourself either physically or mentally or emotionally or transitionally in liminal space. It could be that you look where elements meet in your life, like where you sit by rivers or by the ocean, and where as well liminal space is giving you comfort. Now this page I explored that. I said that liminal space can be made to feel like home. Why? Did I not want to leave it? Did it feel like the only safe space? Was it clinging to what was? Was it being afraid of what could be? So liminal space can present a pause for the broken, where you can mentally let weeds become wishes, where you can dream about moving away from a brokenness in you. So liminal space really does give an amazing safety holding space if you are feeling broken or in the midst of some form of trauma. So I think my first advice to anybody wanting to explore the liminal would be to do just that, to write a timeline of physical places that have felt like the liminal, elemental places where elements meet, or transitions of state that you've had, of emotional journeys where you've had to transform, or heal, where are those places? Where are those places where you dissociated as a holding space for trauma as well? Write your timeline as a liminal space timeline. You may be amazed at how many times you've been through or lived inside the liminal, and the power and the messages and the lessons that that's given you. And in doing that, I think I found for me what is my entrance into the liminal as a very little girl under 5 years old at my very first house, where my family lived up until I was about 7. Now, this was a place where I think formative years I learnt to people please with a very traumatic, narcissistic mother. And I thought back to the link between liminal space and trauma. I think if you have any sort of events in your life that lead you to feel unsafe being you and having to drop parts of your soul and to clam up your voice and not speak and not show emotions because you're not allowed them, then you are going to find yourself living in the liminal. So I think for witches, if you do this and you find spots like that where you're actually living in the liminal for safety, then this is about soul reclamation. This is about reclaiming parts. This is about calling your power home to you. Now, this explains why I have been obsessed for the last year with memories of this old house. I was speaking to a friend and I kept saying, I don't know what's going on with me. I don't know whether I've got some sort of toxic nostalgia going on, because I couldn't stop thinking about this house and me as a little girl sitting on the wall at the end of the garden with my little legs dangling down amongst the gravestones, because that very first garden backed directly onto a graveyard. And I have been so obsessed with memories of this graveyard, dreaming about it, like daytime intrusive thoughts about sitting on the wall. I have researched Google Earth time and time again to see different view shots of it. I've got saved on my camera roll endless pictures taken from Google Earth. I found drone flying channels on YouTube just to see drones flying over the garden. It has called and called and called and called, and it was only trying to chart my own life path of the liminal that I realised graveyards are one of the most powerful forms of physical liminal spaces. It is literally not only where the elements meet, but where we transition state and where like our dead bodies are buried. It doesn't get any more liminal than a graveyard. And for the first 7 years of my life, to escape my mother's ranting and raving and nightmare that she was, I would go to the end of the garden, climb up onto the grave wall and sit with my feet dangling down just to stay calm. And you know what? I think I stayed there. I think there is a part of me that learnt to be silent, to not show emotion, any sort of emotion, to never have an opinion, to only be trying to stay 6 steps ahead to keep my mum happy. Part of me that got abandoned and left behind in order to do that. It was abandonment of self, because I had no other choice if I wanted to remain safe. And it suddenly dawned on me that she found that liminal space very safe, and the obsession wasn't toxic nostalgia. It was a call of a part of me that I'd left behind, that had dropped, and I just knew I was on a soul retrieval mission. I've mentioned this before on the channel as well. I did a video, I think it was called Hunting Personal Horcruxes. That's the only way that I can kind of explain how it feels that people might be able to make a bit more sense of, because it's hard to explain. It feels like I killed off, out of necessity, a little part of myself, or a big part of myself, or all of myself at times, in order to feel safe. And I know that I won't be the only one that will have felt that. And in the killing of the authentic self, a little Horcrux was made. I know that there was a Horcrux on the graveyard wall, a graveyard that I'd never ever got into as a little girl because the graveyard was always locked behind gates. So I'd never actually been in the graveyard, but I'd spent the first 5 years of my life sitting on the wall, dangling my legs down into that graveyard and trying to get calm. So I decided, guys, as the first step in liminal space research, to go back and get access to that graveyard and the wall, and to go and get little me from the wall. And so I drove over to this, my first home. Very run down now, very different, but we owned a card and toy shop, a bike shop, a fruit shop, and that big flat across the top. Also that little house next to it as well. They were all ours. The big blue gate was still the same. That's when my dad would pull his van in to the yard with the garden at the back. There's my old bedroom window, and it just was uncanny that the tarot reading I pulled before I went in, the backs of the cards looked like the only thing that hadn't changed. It looked like those blue gates, which are a huge part of my childhood memory. It's funny the things that our childhood memory retains. This used to be my very first walk to school, the school you can see there right by the church. I'm about to turn right up into Spring Meadow, where I used to go and play as a kid. Not to the main church you see, but to a little Baptist church. I'd contacted them earlier in the week and told them my story and asked if I could possibly gain access to the graveyard. That house there with the green gates is where my mom's friend, who we used to call our auntie, lived. She used to keep huge Afghan hounds. I'm about to turn up Spring Meadow. This is where I played as a child. The chapel, of course, said yes, come over on Sunday when the gates are open. I just couldn't believe I was here, guys. That car park opposite the chapel is where I learnt to ride my bike, a two-wheel bike, and there's the chapel itself behind high gates and locked metal grid gates as well, and high walls. My gosh, I could feel my dad as well. I could feel not only my little me calling, but my dad. I could see him chasing after me on two wheels on my bike, cheering me on as I realised I was riding a bike. And there it is, guys. There's the Spring Meadow Baptist Church, and they welcomed me really beautifully and let me in. And this is me walking up to my very first ever experience of being actually inside the graveyard that I'd spent all my formative years looking at, lost in trauma and trying to stay safe. So what was I hoping to achieve here today? Firstly, it was just reconnecting with that part of me I felt I'd lost, but also asking if she wanted to come home with me to be nurtured and looked after. On the drive down to the house, I had asked her if she would leave a sign of something incredibly obvious and out of place by the wall where I used to sit, as a sign if she wanted to come with me. And don't you know, but I found a little orange fidget ball, all split open, but on the path directly opposite the wall that didn't take me a second to remember. There it is, the wall that I used to sit on. I used to balance on that sharp ledge next to the hedge and dangle my legs down. And there on the path was this orange ball. I didn't even record picking it up. I was so blown away. My phone got put down on a grave, and oh, it was just amazing. I also bought my childhood toy that I always carried around with me. I bought Blue Boy with me and sat the ball and Blue Boy next to the grave as I wandered around and explored the graveyard. The very first time I've ever got in here, it was so emotionally charged and so incredible. I also saw two black shapes at the top of the graveyard where it's overgrown. I don't know whether it was a cat jumping or what it was, but yeah, that was not disconcerting but quite shocking as well. But the graveyard doesn't look any different from when I sat on this wall as a little girl. It just looks no different at all. The other side of that wall is a raised garden that went up into a rockery that I could climb up, hence the fact I could get onto the wall. And it just brought back so many memories. I picked up that orange ball and knew there and then that she was coming with me, and there was no need now to leave her sitting on her own anymore. It felt like a power charge, a soul reclamation, a lost part brought home. It was incredible, as was the graveyard itself. Old, ancient, unkept, just seeped in history, seeped in my own history. What a place to have been sat waiting and calling out all these years. Her call had got so loud this year. So I also picked up rocks. So with an orange ball and rocks in hand, I left the chapel and decided to cross the main road again and walk down to my very first primary school. There's now a zebra crossing where there used to be a lollipop man. I walked across this, the wall of the playground, the room on the corner of this street, my very first classroom. I still remember the name of my very first teacher. She was called Mrs. Parsons, and this is her classroom. We're just coming up to now my very first classroom. Here it is, with high windows that we couldn't look out of. The windows have all been redone, I see. And I just felt like I wanted to go to the key areas with the orange ball to kind of say a goodbye with little me. So this was the infant's door where all the little kids went in. The older kids went in a door a bit higher up, which I never went through because we left this place before I got into the juniors. So this was my entrance door in. I can just see all the little coat racks that are behind these windows. This big window here is the main hall. This was the older kids' door. I also decided to come across to the big church as well. This is where we would sometimes go and have sort of school events, Christmas concerts in here. Also the church where my mum used to proudly boast of screaming at the vicar about how busy she was. It was always her badges of honour were being mean to people and screaming at people. She wore fights like badges of honour, and I'm so glad that I don't deal with that anymore. The people here were absolutely lovely. They showed me around. They said, oh, please come back again. Come back at Christmas. All the building and renovations will be finished and this place is decorated beautifully for Christmas. And you know, I just might do that. So I continued walking around, then noticed a gate on the playground was open of my old school. I went in and there was building work going on, so I asked the builders if I could have just a quick look around the playground. I didn't tell them it was my inner child saying goodbye to the place. And they were again super welcoming. Yeah, come in, have a look. Honestly, this place has really changed, and yet it hasn't. I still see all the old buildings and Mrs. Winter's old hut. Gosh, this place and the memories. So this is the school I was at till I was 7 years old, and we moved to the Welsh borders. One last stop. This was the place where we used to ring doorbells and run off. 2 multi-storey flats there were flats that we used to play in. From about the age of 4, we would wander over all the main roads and play in the flats. It just goes to show that there was nobody really giving a damn. I walked back down the alleyway, back to the main road, and then back up to my old house, and I managed to find an old rock right next to those blue gates. So I came home with some feathers, 2 rocks and the orange ball, and mini me as well, safely tucked into Blue Boy's arms. I am so glad I brought Blue Boy with me, just as a way for mini me to recognise who I was. And there they were on my car seat waiting to go home. It was incredible. I felt my dad so strongly around me. I just said, Dad, all you need to do now is find me a car boot sale, because car boots what me and my dad would do every Sunday, and there have been no car boots anywhere since we all went into lockdown. And don't you know, 1 minute up the road I went past a farm with a car boot on, so of course I pulled in and said, thanks Dad, let's spend the morning together. So now at home, next to my desk, I have a bureau with what for me is an apothecary full of dolls and items, and some of the items I've been buying have been linked to that callback to that house. My toys that never made it to the move to Wales. I don't think my mum packed any of my toys. Blue Boy went missing. This was another one of my key dolls. Pinky White, she went missing. I had a brownie doll that went missing. Over the years, I have managed to track them down and rebuy them. Also, the Blue Lady is full of water from Hayden Hill Park, which is the park just up the road that I got pulled to. That pull has been with me a long time. And now I understand why I've been buying these objects to replace from the past. It's recreating my old bedroom for little me to come to. This is the orange ball that I found on the path. I love the fact that it's a ball, because a ball is often something that's thrown over a wall, and it just makes me feel like she did jump over the wall. It's also like one of these comfort toys, and I love that. It's almost like she sat on it to give herself comfort while she was waiting. Another thing that I really wanted as well was a piece of the wall, but of course I'm not going to do any damage to the wall. But right next to the grave, literally where I would have sat, was this little piece of brick that had fallen off with the most amazing pattern on, which I'm going to do some stone scrying with. Of course, it's all been really washed. I haven't washed the ball yet. I think I am going to use my full moon water to wash the ball. I'm in two minds as whether I wanted to wash it or not. So anyway, the brick is there. There is a stone as well that was by the wall. This is a stone that was at the front of the house by the gates, which I feel my dad asked me to take. And this is a jar full of soil on that boundary line where the wall met the graveyard. Honestly, guys, it was so incredible. This is my hunting Horcruxes necklace as well that I wore as well. Then to find that car boot on the way home, it was really an acknowledgement of feeling my dad's presence as well. I really felt that my dad had my hand the whole morning. When I pulled in onto the car boot, I said, well, Dad, you and me. And as I was wandering around, I found this little bell, and my dad's voice came incredibly clearly into my mind. He went, Bab, by the bell, that's your little me bell, and you can put that on your altar and ring it when you need to speak to little me. So I bought it for 50p, and the lady wrapped it up in newspaper. When I got home and unwrapped it, I hadn't seen the other side. I had no idea that this girl's image was on the other side, a girl with thick wavy hair, just like me as a little girl, on the other side. Little me, it took my breath away. I had no idea there was a little girl's image on there. So guys, that is hunting Horcruxes, and my first investigation of the personal liminal space that's on my liminal space timeline. So I hope you find that helpful, useful in some way. From what I've learned, I think it is a worthwhile task to sit down and write a liminal timeline for yourself. You'll be amazed at how many things you may find that link into either you entering a liminal phase or state or place, and all the ways that you may have seeked out the liminal to mirror when your emotions fall into the liminal or when you've needed safety. Once you've got that timeline, like me, you might decide that you do need to revisit some of those liminal spaces, whether that be actually physically like I did, if you're able to, or in sympathetic magic by recreating a place using sympathetic objects and doing it magically and energetically or on the astral. Why might you do that? It might be to hear the lessons that were there, or to reclaim any parts that got left behind like I felt I needed to do. It just might be that you want to put a full stop on somewhere where you feel there's an energy leak. And I think that's one of the biggest things about working with the liminal as a witch. Everything, it comes down to energy, and I feel that if you've dropped parts of yourself, or there are parts that are remaining in the liminal that should have come out of the liminal, because really a liminal is a transitional space, although it can be really comforting, as it was for my little me, it's really not somewhere where you should stay. So I think if you do suspect that there is something in the liminal that's stuck, then it is soul reclamation, it is soul retrieval. Those are bits of power that are shredded off that you need to claim back to bring yourself into a whole, so there's no energy leaking out anywhere. I think to know yourself and to know your parts, and to know that your parts are nurtured and loved and none of them are left behind anywhere, that is massively empowering in a witchcraft practice. And it's part of a healing journey as well. As witches, we need to address our healing regularly through all the traumas of life, so that we can stand firm, having learnt the lessons that we've needed to learn, and having exited liminal space as well. I think knowing your liminal space timeline as well allows you to go back to do ancestor work. Like, I've really felt strongly my dad come through, probably more than anywhere I've been. I could feel him as I walked up Spring Meadow near that car park where he took my stabilizers off my bike. I could actually feel him. That again I feel was confirmed with the car boot sale and the bell, which I loved. And what an amazing way to talk to ancestors, to feel them, to go back and to physically walk into the liminal where they once were. But not only talking with, say, past ancestors or spirits, there's also an element of talking to past versions of yourself, all of that army of past yous that have been deposited in different places. I think when we look back on our lives, we can see ourselves on some of the key memories we've got, and I think those key memories are probably little horcruxes. And I think some are more like a horcrux than others, where you have self-abandoned and left yourself somewhere, and really, let's go back and get them. It's just a brilliant way of accepting what we've gone through, picking up all the lessons and the shadows and integrating them back in, and integrating our parts back together. So shadow work is brilliant for that. And I think once you see what the liminal looks like for you, it makes it easier to recreate portals when you need them. So for me, so far, I found out that boundaries where elements meet, so big elements like bodies of water with land, or actual boundaries like walls with graveyards, it makes it really clear to me why bones and graveyards always speak to me, and why I always get like amazing voices coming through in those type of places. Everything, I'm having aha moments everywhere. But that's what it looks like for me. Elemental meetings, so graveyards as well. For me, it might look something completely different for you, but you won't know until you've tracked where you feel your liminal spaces were, which are the key ones that are in your memory. If you think liminal space, okay, I know what it is now, but where in my memory banks have I been anywhere like that? If anything jumps out, note it down. I think once you know what it means for you, then you can recreate that. You can find new places that are like that around you now. You could recreate it sympathetically. Why would you want to do that? Because it's an access to growth. It's an access to transformation. It's an access from one point to another. These are all things we really need as witches. It's a safety holding space if you're in trauma, or if you need to sit out and rest for a while. These are liminal spaces that you can seek out in the physical or make mentally inside your head to walk through. You could track liminal space journeys through your own mind to transform. Once you know for you what triggers liminal space, you can then recreate it. What a fantastic, useful tool that is. But for me, most of all, for this first exploration into this, it was collecting mini-me, finding her and bringing her home. The mama in me is joyous. Has it affected the way I feel about myself? Totally, absolutely. I feel like I totally own that first story of my life. Nothing now has been done to me. I have walked through it and made it mine, knotted in what I want next. And she's coming with me on the journey. It has made a difference. It's made a huge difference. So this is worth doing, guys, and I hope you found that interesting. I hope I explained it clearly enough. It's a big concept to try and get across in a 40-50 minute video, so I hope you got it all and I explained it properly. But thanks, guys, so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.